This is the Volleyball Coaching Wizards Podcast, covering everything coaching, motivated and inspired by interviews and conversations with some of the world's great volleyball coaches. To learn more about the project, visit volleyballcoachingwizards.com. Now here are your hosts, John Foreman and Mark Lebedew.
Welcome to episode 21 of the podcast. This time we bring back Anders Kristiansson to center stage, I suppose. In this clip that we use as the starting point, Anders talks about the importance of thinking about psychology in terms of how you develop your practice plans, how you communicate to your players in a practice setting, in a training setting, and not just in kind of the broad terms of developing mental toughness or working on mental abilities. It's an important area and one that both Mark and I thought deserved to be specifically addressed, because it's something as coaches that we probably don't give enough attention to when we're developing a practice plan and when we're communicating to our players what we need to work on and why. Hopefully you get a lot out of this, and of course if you do, we'd appreciate you going over to iTunes and leaving us a rating for the podcast. Here we go.
You also have to think of the psychological factor. If you're working too much with the problem area, you have to at least consider that the player might get worse.
Yes.
If you put it too much as a problem. I mean, that's what I mean. The psychological factor is also something that you have to involve in your training, and you have to think about that without saying now we are practicing mental training, but you have to think about this factor.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think about often. The more you shine a light on something, the more it becomes an issue. So you have to find the balance between practicing the weaknesses, but sometimes not telling the players that it's a weakness.
No. And sometimes actually just do the opposite. Practice your strength. Yeah. Also, don't forget to practice your strength. People feel good about this, and maybe you become even more secure about it. More, I wanted to do it more. If you only focus on the bad things, or on the more bad, or that things that are not so good, I think you create a very heavy environment or heavy situation.
Yeah.
Try to. I always think about this or doing this to. Try reminding myself, remember to practice also your good things.
Yeah.
Not just hopping over to a new area where it's we can win something, but remember to also repeat the good things.
I think that's a wonderful point by Anders there, and I think my reply was also where I would start this thing, and that the shining a light on something, and it's a phrase that I use also every day or often. Shining a light on something brings it more to the foreground, and if you're always focusing on your weaknesses, exactly as Anders said, it tends to bring the mood down. All you're thinking about is that you're bad at something or not as good at something as you need to be, and that has a psychological effect over time. And one of the ways that I work with that, or that I consider that in my training work, is also as I intimated in my reply there to Anders, that I don't necessarily talk about weaknesses or things that we have to improve. Sometimes, obviously, I do, but other times, some things I'll just include in the structure of the practice during the week, and work on it in that way, rather than create the tension necessarily that's sometimes accompanies that kind of work.
All right. Now, just related to that, would an example of that be, say you wanted to work on serve reception, but you didn't want to actually explicitly tell the team you want to work on serve reception? Do you not say anything about it and just make sure that you're including serve-initiated games and drills? kind of where you're going with it?
That's one of the ways. But the formulation that you use is a little bit different. So if I say I want to work on, that's not necessarily a negative. If I start so I can, at the beginning of practice, say I want to spend some time this week on serve reception, that's not a negative.
Right.
But if I start the conversation, and maybe I'm giving some answer that I hadn't hit on yet, if I start the conversation with, we are really bad at serve reception, we need to do this much better, and we're going to spend a lot of practice time on serve reception, then, once I can do that. But if I do that over the course of 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, that creates that negative environment that we talked about. But in general, the answer to your specific question is yes. So if I want to practice serve reception more, if I feel we have a weakness in serve reception and we need to practice it more, then I would do more serve initiated drills and have more side out in a row type drills rather than side out plus high ball plus free ball plus down ball games.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And to your point about how you present, we want to work on versus we're not very good at. It's almost like self-talk in terms of potential impact. If you keep saying it, eventually you're going to believe it, and that's just going to become your identity. We don't power it, or we don't run the BIC very well, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I definitely. And I liked what Anders said about you got to work on the stuff you're good at too.
Yep.
And obviously there's a school of thought which says you want to play to your strengths and you want to continue to develop your strengths, and that's part of that equation. But the way Anders was going with this was you need to ease it, as you were saying earlier, the tension of being fixated on the things that you need to get better at by letting them kind of be successful and, enjoy the process and realize that they are actually, relatively good at something, even if it's not everything. And I would extend it just to players need to have fun at times. It is a game. You play it because you enjoy it. So there does need to be, occasionally at least, some fun injected in things, and that's part of it.
Well, that speaks more to maybe an overarching point about mood of practice and how to help people, cope with the ups and downs of a season. With regards to strengths and weaknesses, though, it's as Vital talks about in his aftermatch, that he always gives aftermatch addresses to a team so that he can control the narrative of the team or of the match. And in the same way, the coach controls lots of other narratives by the information that he gives in practice, by the things that he practices, by what he writes on the whiteboard, and emphasizing strengths is one of those ways, and practicing the things we're really good at. So we're really good at this. This is our great strength. This is what we're going to keep doing. This is what we're going to keep dominating at. That's part of creating an identity, and the balance is a really interesting balance between improving weaknesses and emphasizing strengths. And the Berlin team, we worked a long time, and our strength was always our defense and transition. So our ability to score points by playing volleyball, for want of a better description. And there was one period in the time together where I spent a significant part of our practice time with side out, that we improved our side out, because for a team at our level, our side out was actually not that great, particularly our first ball side out. If you actually dug a little bit deeper, we were often the third best side out team in the German league, for example. Mm-hmm. We made up for it by being we were good in transition, in block, inside out, and we were good for breakpoint situations.
Right.
But what I found out that by spending an amount of practice time on side out offense and first ball side out offense and focusing on that for what ended up being maybe a month, we became marginally better at side out that we were trying for, but we really lost the identity of who we are and what we built over the 3 or 4 year period, and our defense was worse, our transition was worse because we'd been working on a lot of static type drills because side out is the most static part of the game, and we improved the area that we wanted to improve, but we lost everything else. So at some point in the season, I flipped it back again and went back to the things that we were good at, our identity, our strengths, and just made the decision that we'll muddle through on side out and be the best defensive team.
Right. And that speaks to the idea of, you talked about having a team identity.
Yeah.
What you do in training helps to build that identity.
Yeah.
So if you, as the coach, are really focused on, as you said, then naturally the team is going to get focused on service even and start building an identity based on that, which may or may not be the identity that you are looking for. I mean, in your case, you weren't necessarily trying to build an identity as a good side out team, but the natural reaction is from the players, given that much attention, is that, okay, we want to be that team, as opposed to we want to be this other team that we're already good at. So you need, as a coach, you need to be aware of where you're taking things, or where you're allowing the mentality of the players to take things in the direction you want to go. When I was coaching the Exeter men, we were small, and so we were going to struggle as that side out team because we were always facing big blocks, bomb servers against the better teams, and that just wasn't us. We had to be the transition team. Mm-hmm. I had to talk with the guys about, listen, we needed to develop the transition mentality because we can't play the net game at the same level as these other guys. Just the straight up being blocking. We need to be the team that digs balls and scores off of those, and have a better team to play more of a women's style game than strictly a men's style game. And it takes a while, but the more you have that involved in how you train, the more that identity is going to be set.
Yep. I agree. The only thing I'd say is that in some way the identity is an organic process. It's more to do with the group, not more to do, but it's partly to do with the group of people that you have, and then the way that you coach them. Right. Once you develop that identity, then you can spend the time working.
Right, and my point there is that you as the coach need to be looking at your squad, and not just the players but also the staff, obviously, and everything that goes around it, and looking at what it can be and where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and help that identity process along based on where you think the team can go.
Yep. Keep working on your strengths while improving your weaknesses.
Always comes back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not It's not brain surgery.
No, or rocket science.
Or rocket science. One part of Anders is talking about the psychology of the training and how the training affects the overall mood, the overall confidence of the player. And ultimately, when we're having this conversation, I think we're talking about confidence and how a player feels about going into the game. And if we are talking about weaknesses a lot, we're chipping away at somebody's confidence. If you're always emphasizing that part, you are by necessity making challenging a player's confidence. And a confidence is something that a player always needs to go into the game. And conversely, when you practice your strengths, you're building somebody's confidence. And I think this is, in general, something that we don't appreciate as much as we might. And I've had the situation, even at this point in my career, where I've been around a lot of players, and a lot of players of a good level who are experienced winners who've been through a lot of situations, that confidence is far more fragile than you might imagine. And I'm sure for younger players that it's even more so.
Yeah, and it actually makes me think about how a lot of us, when we think about doing subs, for example, to bring in a player who we want to get a little bit of court time, and maybe it's garbage time in a set, and but the idea is to bring in the player when they're going to be in a position to succeed. Just to exactly, it's about developing confidence and building confidence, and giving them a chance to do well what they generally do well. And too many times we don't necessarily think of that in the same way in the broader perspective of what we're doing in training. We have the mentality in one place, but we don't necessarily have the mentality in another place.
I think that you can extend it to the level of technical practice, technical instruction. So if you have a player who has some experience with volleyball, now not an absolute beginner, because obviously they're a literal blank slate, but somebody who has had any level of success, and if you bring them into practice, into the gym, and say, okay, you can't do this, we need to fix this, you are necessarily challenging their confidence in what they can do. Now, if it's something that, if somebody can't serve over the net, you say, we need to fix your serve, then it's clear. But if somebody's had some little bit of success and can spike pretty well and more or less goes where they wanted to, and they score some points, and you tell them, okay, the first thing we're going to do is fix your spiking, then what you're actually saying to them is, you can't spike right now.
Right.
And that is a negative. That's a negative statement against somebody. It's a challenge, and this is, even when we're talking about technical development, we have to be careful of this confidence, of this psychological part of the work.
Right, and a step further, not only do you potentially risk shattering confidence a little strong, but certainly chipping away at confidence, you run the risk of pushback, because the player who has had success before, and suddenly you're telling them they're not very good, whether it's a state of denial or just they don't believe you, or as Arnie Ball said in his kind of tail end of his interview, the coach is a liar, whatever the case may be, then your job becomes that much more difficult.
Yes.
To try to get them to go in the direction you want to take them.
Yes. Yeah, really. So Anders' point there, both the specific and the general part of it is really important. And coaching, we know, is multifaceted. I think is a nice way to describe it. It really just includes so many different things, and too little of the time we think about the psychology, what we are working in practice, how we work in practice affects the psychological level, the psychological state of the players, how we can develop confidence by how we work, or conversely, how we can not shatter, but how we can negatively affect confidence is just the same.
Right. And this is something that, perhaps for certain of us who have, I guess you could say, kind of a forward-looking point of view, and this is something I talked about with Ryan Mitchell, is, for some of us, we reach a level of success or an achievement, we win a title, we win a match, whatever, and we're automatically on to the next thing. We perhaps don't spend enough time enjoying the success we've just had. And players can obviously do this too. But the point that Ryan and I were kind of talking about was that as coaches, we need to make sure that, yes, okay, eventually we need to get on to the point of how do we get better from here?
Mm-hmm.
But we also need to acknowledge the progress that's been made and allow the players, allow the team to enjoy that and to recognize that. And I think and I've talked with players here at Midwestern, one of the things you don't see as a player is how far you've come. It's because graduate process, you don't see the gains that you've made, because you're thinking about, as a lot of players, especially on the women's side, they're still thinking about, well, I'm not very good at, or I need to be better at. And
I've got all these things I have to work on.
Yep.
And forgetting what you've done.
Yeah. And that's an integral part of building that confidence in players, where you need to do that. Yeah.
I had a couple of guys, particularly young guys, that I talked about that quite a lot with this year. So with the difference between now and at the beginning. Yeah, you feel bad now, but do you remember how you were at the beginning, that you were not able to do this thing? So yeah, you're right. So I've come a long way. All right, so I can feel a little bit good about that. Yep. And it just keeps going and going.
Yeah, and we need to recognize that even in the process of practice, and it goes to your point about how we address players in the team through the course of not just what we're going to work on, but actually working on it.
Yeah.
And not that obviously we want every rep is not going to be successful, and we shouldn't look for every rep to be successful. Karch in the HB clinic last year said that in the USA gym, their goal is to have 2 out of 3 successful reps, which by definition means 1 out of 3 is not successful.
Yeah.
And obviously we need to deal with, as you said, psychology, how that is. If you're dealing with perfectionist players, then 1 out of 3 is going to be a challenge for them. And we need to, and we're obviously working on walking that line.
Yes. Yeah. It's, I've heard that idea before with American football, with NFL teams or college teams, that when they plan their practices, because they're playing offense against defense, so both sides are working. They only program 6 repetitions or 8 or 2 or whatever it is, and then they say, okay, from these 6, we expect it to work well 3 times or 4 times or whatever it is, because the defense is also working. So, you can do it the other way around. You can say, we expect the defense to be successful 2 times. And, I like that. I need to listen to that couch idea a little bit more. The idea of of unsuccessful repetitions.
Right. It's an interesting one, and it's also the interesting element of getting that balance right. Because if there's not enough success, then the team gets frustrated, and you might see them shut down. And ends up being an unproductive practice, and you're dealing with the psychological issues that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas if there's not enough failure, then you're just not pushing enough, and there's not enough development.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting close on time. Any final thoughts?
No, nothing. I think that I really need to add. I think the points that Anders made originally, the points that we've talked about, that it's not only practice is not only technical, it's not only tactical, it's not only teamwork, but there's a psychology of it from a day-to-day work perspective, and we need to consider that as well as every other little thing that we need to consider. Coaching's hard.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why we love it.
That's why we love it. That's why we love the end of the season.
But then get excited about the beginning of the next one for some inexplicable reason.
Yes. We're crazy like that.
Exactly. All right, we'll leave it there.
No worries.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. For show notes and more, visit volleyballcoachingwizards.com/podcast. Got an idea for a future episode or want to ask a question? Send an email to podcast@volleyballcoachingwizards.com.